one of my best friends right now, who's a type 2 diabetic, his blood sugar's 18. He wears Dexcom because I forced him to. He's hesitant to go on a GLP-1, and he's not been an obese guy his whole life. The GLP-1 is not just for weight loss. It's amazing at what it does for blood sugar. He's hesitant. He's like, oh, I don't want to go on
Yeah.
medication. Like, well, you know, you need it. Like, it's not your fault. He
He's got to
does.
help himself like you did. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so true. And it's so true in so many medical conditions. Good evening and welcome to Nurse Maureen's Health Show podcast. I'm Maureen McGrath, registered nurse, nurse continence advisor, sexual health educator. And tonight we're talking about type 2 diabetes, a condition that affects millions of Canadians and is becoming increasingly common across all age groups. A diagnosis of type 2 diabetes can bring many emotions, from fear and frustration to confusion and even shame. But diabetes is far more than a blood sugar problem. It affects physical health, emotional well-being, relationships, and quality of life. The good news is that with the right support, education, and treatment, people can successfully manage their condition and live healthy, fulfilling lives. Joining me tonight is Malcolm Kelly. Malcolm is a husband, father of two boys, active member of his community, people leader, nurse, and a type 2 diabetic. He is going to share his personal journey of living with type 2 diabetes, the challenges he faced, and the strategies that help him take control of his health. We'll also explore the important connection between diabetes, mental health, and behavior change, and discuss how resilience, support, and self compassion, above all else, can make a meaningful difference. Whether you have diabetes yourself, care for someone who does, or simply want to learn more about this common chronic condition, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. Good evening, Malcolm. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much for joining the podcast. Malcolm, take us back to the day you were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. What emotions did you experience, and how did that diagnosis change the way you saw yourself?
Yeah, Maureen, it was an interesting conversation that I had with my general practitioner, and a diagnosis that was provided to me in a way that was sort of, well, you're diabetic now. And off into the world I went as a newly diagnosed type 2 diabetic without much support. Just a requisition for some additional tests and an idea that we were probably going to be starting some medication. And I got in my car, and that's when the flood of emotions actually happened. And I was fairly disappointed with myself, bit disgusted, shameful, was beating myself up, was in a lot of denial. You see, I'd been obese for my entire life. So at the time, I weighed about 320 pounds. Even though I'm 6'5" and very active, I carried a lot of extra weight, and it all came crashing down on me in that moment. And I thought, my life choices had brought me to that point, and this diagnosis was going to change my life. And at the moment, I didn't realize that it would be a positive change in my life. I thought it was the start of something really bad, and emotionally, I really didn't know what to do. The only thing I knew what to do is drive around for a little bit before I'd go home and have to explain to my wife this diagnosis that I've been given. Um, and it was at that point that I did something that would forever change the trajectory of how I managed my condition and my disease, which we can talk about, which I think was one of the most instrumental things in my success.
Yeah, it makes me think of you in that car, getting into that car and getting that diagnosis and a feeling of, there's no turning back and you driving forward. Can't help think of the analogy there. You've spoken openly about fear, embarrassment, shame, and even guilt after your diagnosis. Why do you think so many people struggle emotionally when diagnosed with a chronic condition like diabetes?
Yeah, I think it's partly to do with blaming themselves. And although I have an extensive family history with diabetes and was probably destined to be a type 2 diabetic just from my genealogy, again, as an obese adult and an obese teenager, I'd felt that it was probably more my life choices that had gotten me to that point. And although, like I said, I was a very active person playing competitive rugby for 30 years, playing football, playing hockey, all those kinds of things into my adulthood, um, and working out consistently and doing all those kinds of things, I still thought that my obesity probably was the cause of the disease, and because of all of the societal pressures on people who are heavy, I was blaming myself, and that emotion turned to embarrassment and shame, and I didn't want to tell anybody that I was diabetic. I felt that that would just, you know, prove to people that I was an unhealthy human my entire life, and the result of which was my own fault.
And yet it was probably a pathway to getting healthier for you. Now, as a nurse, did you recognize some of the warning signs about diabetes?
Yeah, absolutely. The frequent urination, the tired, the dry mouth, all these kinds of things, I knew to be true, but ignored them, mostly because I was embarrassed. I was, again, shameful. I knew what was the trajectory. I knew what was happening, but I was in denial. And even at the time I got diagnosed, I called my mother while I was in the car, and who's a diabetic and a diabetic educator, worked at a children's youth camp for a good number of years as a diabetic educator. I called her and said, "Listen, my A1C is 8.4, and my doctor just told me I'm a type 2 diabetic." And my words to her was, "I'm not a diabetic. I'm going to fix this." And she said, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you, you are a diabetic, and that's just a fact. Now, how you manage it is going to be up to you." But uh, even after the diagnosis, to an expert like my mother, I was still
Right.
in denial. So.
Right. And it sounds like you dismissed some of your symptoms. Primary care is not easy. Doctors have, 10, 12 minutes, and then they have to write notes for each patient visit. What can your experience teach healthcare providers and the public about listening to their bodies and seeking help sooner, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that I've spoken to clinicians about since my diagnosis. I think, physicians are under an immense amount of pressure to see patients. They've got waiting lists, um, and I think it takes them away from sometimes seeing what the patient actually needs, who's in front of them. And I probably would have um, um, been helped by a little bit more time with my clinician. We have a great relationship, don't get me wrong, but at that moment of time when I was extremely vulnerable, I had lots of questions, but didn't ask them because I just didn't think that we had enough time. And I think physicians need to understand a couple of things, and I say this respectfully because they're extremely knowledgeable people, but obesity is a disease, and obesity leads to lots of different things mentally. And when you layer on a diagnosis like type 2 diabetes with a lifelong struggle with a disease like obesity, the mental impact is incredible, and it takes some time to help patients unpack both of those kinds of things together, because in my opinion they go hand in hand in some cases, and then talk about the path forward, because when you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, life doesn't end, and for me life started. And I say this all the time, and it's a bit perverse, but I sometimes wish I would have got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes sooner in my life, so I could have made the changes that I've made, and taken control of not only my obesity, but the future of my diabetes.
I can totally understand that. I think providers look at lab work and, go get your lab work done. This is your level. You're diabetic. We've got to get the blood sugar down. But I think, with all due respect as well, they can tend to dismiss the emotional aspects of it and the mental health and, how it's life changing for people. As you mentioned, eventually your life became better, but it took about a year, you told me, to come to terms with your diagnosis. So what helped you, Malcolm, move from denial and frustration to acceptance and empowerment?
Yeah, I think it was an emotional response that I wasn't really prepared for. And you have the whole fight or flight, and I chose to really fight. And um, I really took that moment as I parked the car outside of my gym. That's where I ended up because I figured the first thing I need to do was go work out. I literally looked in the rearview mirror and I said to myself, What can I do to change this trajectory?" Yeah, I heard my mom say I'm always going to be a diabetic, but how do I get control over my disease? Well, one was to sort of become healthier, and what that meant to me was I needed to lose, some weight. What that number was didn't matter. It was just, and I couldn't really work out any more than I already was working out. Could refine the workouts, things like that. But uh, that then pointed me to diet and what could I eat. And I hate using the word diet because it's not a diet, it's just the way I eat now. But really looking at what I was eating, quality, quantity, those kinds of things, and making sure that everything that I was putting in my mouth was being put there for a reason, if you will. And I did, there's three things that I did that were helped me in that transition. The first one, and I didn't know why I did it, and I still don't know why I did it, but and I say it's a video that has a tremendous number of views, but not a lot of likes because I'm the only one who's seen it. But I took a video of myself telling myself what I wanted to do while I was sitting in the car. And over the course of that year, when I felt like I was falling off and maybe not staying true to my goals, I watched that video of myself, and it was that raw emotion that of me telling me what I needed to do, which helped me persevere through that first year, which is really what drove my success rate, I think.
Right. You mentioned going to the gym and also the four-letter word diet. Nobody likes that
Yes.
word.
Yeah.
How important is emotional health and emotional well-being and mental health in successfully managing type 2 diabetes?
I think it's extremely important. A lot of us are comforted by different things, and that's we don't need to. I'm not a neurologist, but there's lots of different chemicals in the brain that stimulate happiness and other kinds of things. And for me, being a heavy person my entire life, and I say fat because I'm not afraid of that word anymore. Being a fat, obese person my entire life, I had come to the point where, oh, he's just the big guy, right? Oh, he's a big funny guy. It's not a problem. He's just a big guy. He carries it well. Those kinds of things get taught to you and told to you. And so, when I got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, I thought to myself, well, I am a big guy, but is that, is can that be changed? And I started to really invest a lot of time in looking at resources around the kinds of foods you eat, macros, the kinds of energy you need to do different things. And I chose to take, sugar and refined sugar out of my diet. And I had really great success losing a good amount of weight pretty quickly, relatively speaking, with just modifications to the things I ate and the quantities that I ate, keeping with the same amount of exercise that I was doing. And really that positive reinforcement helped my mental state in a great way. I started to become, gamifying the situation, if you will, seeing what I could do to increase, my results and things like that. But you know, I think it's that positive reinforcement that really helps, you get a handle on your disease, and then also creates this mental positiveness that keeps you going, right?
And it sounds like diabetes for you was something that was happening to you. And, a lot of people feel that way, I would imagine. But then you made a transformation where it sounds like it became something you could work with through better food choices, different types of exercise. Let's talk about your success here now, Malcolm. You've lost 70 pounds and 7 inches off your waist. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
that's
It
amazing.
yeah, I mean, I'm not afraid to tell people my story, and I'm not afraid to show people, the clothes I used to wear, and I'm not afraid of the word obese. I'm not afraid of diabetes anymore. because I have control over it. And it's amazing. It is a journey that people need to go through. And I have a huge support network, my wife, my kids, but I did do it on my own. And sometimes that creates a bit of an emotional response from my family because they say, we were here, we could have helped. And unfortunately, it wasn't their fight, it was mine. And,
Hmm.
I think that the losing of the 70, now 80 pounds, is a result. And the second thing that I did in conjunction with the video is I threw the scale away. I didn't weigh myself for 2 years because I didn't want the number driving my activity. I wanted the activity driving the activity. And the results I was seeing in the mirror and I was seeing in the clothes that I wore. I think too many people step on the scale every morning and they worry about a number or they look at their finger stick with respect to their blood sugar and worry about that number versus making the changes that will result in those numbers being positive you know when they take those steps to go on the scale or look at their blood sugar.
Awesome. And you've credited GLP-1 medications and continuous glucose monitoring technology, particularly the Dexcom G7, with helping you gain control of your diabetes. How is being able to see your glucose levels as opposed to your weight in real time changed your daily decisions and behaviors?
Yeah, it's incredible, right? Data is power. And I think, the addition of, as you said, GLP-1 to what I was already doing, which was, modified the way I ate and exercise, just gave me that additional boost to lose. At that point, I'd lost probably 35 pounds, 40 pounds, and then the GLP-1 helped me lose the additional weight. But not only did it help me lose the weight, but the weight loss and the medication also helped me control my blood sugar. But at the time that I was diagnosed, my GP said, you're going to have to get a little machine here, and you're going to have to stick your finger twice a day or more than that if you can do it, because we want to see what your blood sugar readings look like throughout the day, and then write them all down, and then come back and we can talk about it. And you know, even as a someone who's done that as a healthcare practitioner, I was hesitant to do it. In my
It's a
opinion, it
lot of
hurt.
work, also.
It, yeah, it's a lot of work. It hurt.
Hmm.
I'm not great at keeping the records. So then when I realized that, Dexcom G7 was available and you could wear it and it would continuously give you this data on an ongoing basis every 5 minutes at the palm of your hand, on my cell phone, which, as we all know this, everything we know is on our cell phone these days. Um,
Exactly.
that continuous reinforcement and understanding of what my blood sugar was doing when I was exercising, when I was eating, what I was eating, and just seeing it in real time really, really, really not only reinforced, the great work that I was doing, but it also helped me understand what kinds of things altered my blood sugar and when. So, and more importantly, that data was all collated, and I can share it with my physician directly or my wife directly. Like, it was just an easy way to have that data at your fingertips without actually having to stick your finger, to be honest. And
Right.
knowing that you could, when I felt tired, I could look at my readings on my app and know that, oh, it's not my blood sugar that's making me tired. It's just me being tired. Whereas before, and maybe you've drank a lot of water that day, so you have to, you urinate more than normal. And I was able to look at my Dexcom G7 readings and know that it wasn't my blood sugar that was causing that. It was just I drank too much water that day, right?
Right,
So.
right. And by the same token, if you went off of your diet, if you will, would you'd see your blood sugar levels rise?
Yeah, I think more importantly for me, the control aspect of my disease came from being able to see what my blood sugar was doing and when it was doing it. So when I'd have a meal, You would expect your sugar to rise for sure, and then you would expect it to come back down. And people who aren't diabetic, it fluctuates all the time. The challenge is when your pancreas isn't working as well as it should. That's when, your blood sugar might stay elevated for longer, or it might be elevated by certain foods. So I just became, you know, really, really accustomed to looking at my readings on an ongoing basis throughout the day. And again, it was fascinating to me to see my blood sugar go up and then come back down. And it was so calming to know that, like, I was in control of my disease. And really, this ability to see the data on real time basis, I think, was the final step to real control over my disease. And I tell people proudly now I'm a diabetic. Before I used to whisper it, now I go for a coffee and I say, I do have cream and sweetener in my coffee, and I say, make sure it's sweetener, please, because I'm a type 2 diabetic and I can't have sugar.
Hmm.
Whereas before I would never have said that. And it's this control over the disease that has allowed me to be that proud of who I am. And I am a person, but I have type 2 diabetes and I'm not ashamed of it anymore.
That's amazing. For listeners who may be newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, who are struggling with obesity, shame, self blame, or feelings of failure, what message would you want them to hear tonight?
Yeah, know that he struck an emotional chord there, Maureen. It's
Uh,
know that it largely is all in your control. It's easy to say that now. On the day that I was diagnosed, I never would have thought this would be possible. I never would have thought that someone who is 45 years of age could lose 80 pounds. I never thought that I would be this proud of being a diabetic. But know that it's all possible with the right focus of effort, the right understanding of the kinds of things you're eating, and how much the right medication, and then knowing what your sugar is doing. And that's where Dexcom G7 and that continuous glucose monitoring system can be life changing. And I think all of those things came together for me, and I had a real positive outcome. I think the video that I did on day one, I still watch to this day, and it reinforces the emotion. I mean, humans were real good at saying tomorrow we'll start something, or it's not that bad, or ignoring the signs and symptoms like I did. But when I watch my video, I can't ignore that because it's me telling me. And I really, at the end of the day, what I'd say is lots of people will want to help and they can help. You can do it on your own. And you are the one who's going to have to fight the fight and really take control. And when you have control over your disease, whether it's obesity and type 2 diabetes, and whatever that looks like, it doesn't have to be an 80-pound weight loss. But once you have control back, it's so powerful.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you've really come out the other side of this and, are a big success story. And I love the fact that you looked at your blood sugars instead of your weight on a scale because people in general don't like to look at the weight on the scale. So kudos to the Dexcom G7. Malcolm, thanks so much for joining the program tonight. I really appreciate you sharing your story and keep going.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. As I said, whether you have diabetes yourself, whether you love somebody or care for somebody who does, or simply want to learn more about this very common chronic condition, tune in or share the episode with somebody that you care about. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Maureen McGrath, registered nurse, nurse continence advisor, sexual health educator. And until next week, stay healthy.